So I ask you, my fellow Americans, what the hell has happened to the Republican Party? Some will say it was pretty bad to begin with, but now it has been hijacked by one Donald J. Trump and turned into an engine of hatred, xenophobia, corruption, and mismanagement. Where is the party of Lincoln when we need one in these United States of America?
It's my party and I'll cry if I want to, cry if I want to, cry if I want to. You would cry too if it happened to you.
No, it wasn't always this way. In this presidential election season, it is time to reflect on the partially progressive Republicans who put this current crop of discompassionate conservatives to shame, ghosts of the grand old party past.
If elephants never forget, then let's never forget these elephants.
Abraham Lincoln.
Labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration.
Lincoln's first annual message to Congress, December 2nd, 1861.
And Donald Trump? He talks about fighting for workers while setting back the labor movement to help the rich. Speaking to the North American Building Trades Union in 2016, Trump said,
"It's time we give you the level playing field you deserve."
And then, as president, he cut the number of workplace inspectors, eliminated requirements for employers to record worker injuries and provide safety training, failed to raise the minimum wage as promised, made it harder for low-wage workers to get overtime pay, and fight wage theft. And the huge corporate tax cuts that were supposed to create jobs, AT&T promised to create 7,000 jobs if tax cuts were passed. Got a tax windfall of $21 billion and then cut 23,328 jobs.
And now back to Abraham Lincoln from his second inaugural address, March 4th, 1865, as the Civil War was nearing its end.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
What has Donald Trump done to unify the country in divisive times? After the confrontation between violent white supremacists and anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville, in which neo-Nazis chanted, "The Jews will not replace us," the president famously said,
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
No, Mr. President, white supremacists are not fine people. As the nation erupted in protests against police murders of unarmed African Americans, the president spoke of
rioting, looting, arson, and violence.
Without request from governors, he sent in federal troops to do battle against the people in violation of the Constitution. No, Mr. President, no. No justice, no peace.
President Theodore Roosevelt. We're all worried about climate change in the 21st century. Any wise words from a bull moose who lived in the 19th and 20th?
Short-sighted men in their greed and selfishness will, if permitted, rob our country of half its charm by their reckless extermination of all useful and beautiful wild things. The greatest good for the greatest number applies to the number within the womb of time, compared to which those now alive form but an insignificant fraction. Our duty to the whole, including the unborn generations, bids us restrain an unprincipled present-day minority from wasting the heritage of these unborn generations. The movement for the conservation of wildlife and the larger movement for the conservation of all our natural resources are essentially democratic in spirit, purpose, and method.
So Republicans can be democratic defenders of the Republic. Imagine that.
After 3 years in office, the Trump administration has reversed more than 100 major climate and environmental rules that it has deemed burdensome to the fossil fuel industry. He has withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Accord on climate change. On the existential issue of our time, he said,
"The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive."
While the Interior Department was busy opening up huge tracts of protected land from oil and gas leasing, the president signed the Great American Outdoors Accord into law, a modest allocation of federal funding for public lands, stating,
From an environmental standpoint and from just the beauty of our country standpoint, there hasn't been anything like this since Teddy Roosevelt, I suspect.
Mr. President Teddy Roosevelt is turning in his grave, while even Richard Nixon is turning in his grave. Nixon, who was arguably our worst president before you showed up, established the Environmental Protection Agency by executive order in 1970, an agency which you have decimated.
Five-star General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
From his farewell address, January 17, 1961.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Wow, I like that. I like Ike.
President Trump told the graduating class at West Point,
"We are ending the era of endless wars."
that is what Trump has promised in 2016, but the endless wars have not ended. Trump has increased military spending by $200 billion and dropped more bombs and missiles than his two predecessors did in their first terms. He has withdrawn from 5 treaties limiting the number of nuclear weapons and missiles. With regards to Iraq, Trump said,
"Bomb the shit out of the Islamic State. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families."
with U.S. support, Iraqi troops did exactly that in Mosul, massacring all the survivors, more than 40,000 civilians.
In 1987, Ronald Reagan stood by the Brandenburg Gate and said,
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity, here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Trump, however, believes in walls. He believes in separating families at the border. Speaking of Mexicans crossing over the Rio Grande, he said,
"They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, killers, and I'm not just saying Mexicans, I'm talking about people from all over."
During his 2016 presidential campaign, Trump mocked disabled New York Times reporter Sergei Kovaleski at a North Carolina rally, saying,
"Now the poor guy, you've got to see this guy,"
mimicking his physical disability. This was but a hint of a war on people with disabilities launched by the president once in office, marked by the administration's effort to make it harder to get on Social Security disability and stay on it. This contrasts sharply with George H.W. Bush as he signed the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990.
This historic act is the world's first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. We are keeping faith with the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These words have been our guide for more than 2 centuries as we've labored to form our more perfect union. But tragically, for too many Americans, the blessings of liberty have been limited or even denied. Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down.
It is comforting to know that several Republicans have repudiated the president or his positions. What is extraordinary is that 2 of Trump's predecessors as Republican candidates for president, John McCain and Mitt Romney, have stood up to the president. Mitt Romney cast the sole Republican vote in the Senate for impeachment. John McCain cast a deciding vote in the Senate against Donald Trump's proposed partial repeal of Obamacare, coming to the Senate after being diagnosed with brain cancer to turn his thumbs down on the bill. Donald Trump had previously said of McCain,
He lost, so I never liked him as much after that because I don't like losers. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured.
this from a man who received 5 draft deferments during the Vietnam War.
Donald Trump lies a lot. According to the fact checkers database, he has made 19,127 false or misleading claims, saying that the press is
An enemy of the people.
and the source of.
Fake news.
He calls the truth a lie and a lie the truth over and over again. One of his lies is that people will commit election fraud by casting absentee ballots, a totally unsubstantiated claim. And then, to show his true colors, he urged voters in North Carolina to vote twice to test his assumption, despite this being illegal. In an interview with Fox News' Chris Wallace, the president declined to say if he would accept the results of the 2020 presidential election in November.
I have to see. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no.
Further, he said that the election results
May never be accurately determined.
Calvin Coolidge, one of the nation's least remembered Republican presidents, once said, "No man ever listened himself out of a job. So keep talking, Mr. President, and know that you will have to listen to the American people in November."